Here with our special. I see Mayor Wynn. I don't know if you're able to say a few words. Mayor Wynn is our vice chair of the Wasatch Front Economic Development District, but I think Mayor, if you want to say a few words about this process and what we've been doing, and just kick us off today, and then I'll work on the agenda and send it over to the folks that are here to talk about it.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to say a few words. I'm excited to see the results of this study and continue with great economic work in the state of Utah. So very, very excited about it. I'm sorry I'm not there in the office with you all today in the building. I am afraid of driving in the snow, and it is bad out here today. And on top of that, I had a meeting at 7:30 this morning, and I have another one at 10:30. So it's a busy day, but thank you all who braved the weather and who has joined us online. So thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. I think it would be beneficial if we just went around the room really quickly and just did some introductions. So maybe we start. Let's start with the folks that are here from Des Moines and the state, and then we'll start with you, Tara, and then go around. And as people are getting online, we'll get them later.
My name's Tara Anderson. I'm with the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget.
Dan Gunderson with Des Moines Associates, the consultant that's helping the state with this process.
Hello, everyone. Laura Hansen. I'm the State Planning Coordinator at the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget.
Morning, I'm Alan Packard with Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District.
Hey, Jordan.
I'm Alex Tranmer with Des Moines Associates, part of the consultancy working with the state as well.
Good morning. I'm Stephen Abrams, subbing in for Brad Mortensen from Weber State University this morning.
He's a healthy sub for sure. I'm Marcia White. I work at Wasatch Front Regional Council, and I am the Economic Development Director here and staff for this committee.
Good morning, everyone. Eric Gibson with Better City. We're a consultant group who's helping Wasatch Front write their 5-year plan up in September.
Jevin Gibb, Economic Development Director for Salt Lake County.
George Honor, Wasatch Front Regional Council, Long Range Planning Group.
Good morning, all. Nick Fritz, Impact Investing Director for Intermountain Healthcare.
Chris Sloan representing Tooele County.
Edward Bennett with the Swazo Business Center.
Tiffany McClellan filling in for Darren Brush at Davis Technical College.
Michaela Jordan, Community Planner here at WFRC.
Good morning, everyone. Rosie Hernandez with the Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Rosie, maybe it would be beneficial if you led you've got the list there, easier to, or, yeah, I just don't, yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll start with Muriel. Go ahead if you want to introduce yourself. Or maybe,
Go ahead.
There she is.
Sure. Sorry. Muriel Sochmil, X Factor Strategic Communications.
Alex, let's see. Mayor Wynn has already introduced herself. There's somebody that says iPhone.
That might be me, Scott Parkinson, Ogden Industrial Development Corp.
Hey, Scott. Good morning.
Hi.
Commissioner Elliott. Randy. Good morning. He does look frozen. We'll go on to Mark Knoll.
Yeah, Mark Knoll, the Economic Unit at the Utah Department of Workforce Services.
Brandon.
Good morning, Brandon Wood with the Northwood Group, Commercial Real Estate.
Rick.
Rick Bullion, Economic and Workforce at Salt Lake Community College.
Chris Roybal.
Good morning, everybody. Chris Roybal, Northern Utah Economic Alliance. Good to be with you.
I can't see the name of the next person. Mitzi, sorry, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Mitzi, a Communications Coordinator and Inclusion and Diversity Officer at X Factor Strategic Communications.
Welcome. Ty.
Did you say Guy?
I said Ty Bailey, but we'll start with Ty Bailey first.
Oh, Ty Bailey, I'm Morgan City Manager.
Hi, Ty.
That's a phone number.
Oh, Holland Wilbanks, are you? Oh, she's connecting. We'll come back to you, Holland. Mike, subject.
Good morning, Mike Sopchak, Communications Manager here at WFRC.
Marion.
Good morning, Marion Florence, Chief Financial Officer at WFRC.
Susie Becker.
Hi, Susie Becker, Zions Public Finance.
Jennifer. You're just on mute. Still on mute.
Sorry.
There you go.
Sorry, Jennifer Domenici in the Housing and Community Development Division within the Department of Workforce Services. I'm covering for Christina Oliver.
Great, thanks. Guy Latender, it's your turn now, Guy.
Guy Latender, Utah Advanced Materials Manufacturing Initiative.
Caitlin.
Caitlin Roberts, Induction Bio.
Welcome. Anisa.
Anisa Brown, Catalyst Campus Executive Director, and then Head of Silicon Slopes Aerospace and Defense, as well as a committee member. That is it.
Shannon.
Good morning. This is Shannon Ellsworth. I work for Rio Tinto Kennecott.
Jared.
Jared Stewart with Tooele City. Thank you.
Commissioner Elliott, we're back to you.
Yeah, so Commissioner Elliott, I'm on the iPhone now. I'm off the desktop, so always count on the Apple. Davis County.
I can't see the next. Anton.
Anthony Stoffer with the Romney Group.
Oh, nice. Bert's on. Bert.
Hi, Bert Granberg with WFRC's Analytics Group. I'll be in the office in a few minutes.
Chanel.
Good morning, Chanel Flores, Economic Development Director for Davis County.
I'm gonna, Jory, you've already introduced yourself. I'm gonna skip over Commissioner Froer just real quick. Blaine Fackrell.
Yeah. Commissioner Gage for Weber County. Sorry, I'm on the phone.
All right, thanks. Commissioner Fackrell.
Yeah, Blaine Fackrell from Morgan County, and I'm actually almost there.
Oh, great. Ben Hart.
Ben Hart, Executive Director at the Inland Port.
Alan Evans.
Alan Evans, Business Development at the Utah Inland Port Authority.
Shailene.
Hi, Shalene Gee with Regional Development at Zions Bank.
Oh, we're just, Rachel. Oh, Rochelle, sorry. I did that the last time too. Rochelle. We'll come back to you, and then there's another phone number, and I don't know if it's already been used. 88.
Yeah, that's me. This is Abby with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. I'm on my way in. Bad accident in Tooele, so.
No, yeah, well, be safe. We'll come back to Holland real quick if you're still on. There you go.
Holland Wilbanks, National Account Manager for Big D Construction.
All right, Rochelle, I did it right. Yeah. God.
Rochelle Custer, Tooele County Community Development Director.
I'm sorry, Rochelle. I bad. Have I missed anyone introduction wise? Anybody come in late? Yeah. Okay. You can sit up here. Really, you can. So thank you, everybody. This is a really like I said, it's a special meeting for us to have in January. We will have quite a few special meetings coming up with our 5-year SEDS plan, but we're excited to hear what the state has, Moines and Associates have figured out for us, and we're excited to implement those as far as part of our 5-year SEDS plan. So as you listen to them, we're hoping that we can also put them somewhat into our 5-year SEDS plan. So with that, I'll turn the time over to you, Laura.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming together today. Sorry, I've got to clear my throat. Okay, thank you. So this is our third visit to Wasatch Front EDD as part of this planning process. And I thought it might be good to just kind of take a step back and just remind everyone where this started and where we've been, and then we'll dig into where we're going. So we received a grant from the Economic Development Administration to develop a statewide version of the SEDS, essentially unifying all of the various different regional SEDS documents and then connecting it to the work of the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission happening at the state. And Alex and Dan will go into kind of what the charge was that we gave them. But our first visit to you all really focused on what are your goals, what are your challenges, what opportunities do you see, just really kind of getting to understand the Wasatch Front EDD area and some of the opportunities and challenges in this area. We took all of that feedback and we've been visiting all 7 of the EDDs in the state, the various different regions. We were in St. George yesterday and headed up to Logan this afternoon. So we took all of that information, identified some key themes. Then we did a lot of data analysis and Camoin did a great analysis of how Utah stacks up against other states in the nation in terms of a series of 6 economic prosperity indicators. And then we applied that same analysis to the state of Utah, seeing how different regions kind of stack up to one another, what areas you're doing well, what areas maybe somebody else is doing a little better and might be an opportunity and growth area. So we presented that information at our second meeting. We also did a business survey, which we sent out through the Chambers of Commerce, through this group and a variety of other venues. We didn't get a ton of responses to that, not as many as we had hoped for, but the data that we did get was very rich, very thoughtful. And so I believe we've shared all of that information with you already, but we're going to do a recap of some of the kind of key findings and highlights from that business survey. Since that time, Camoin has been working with us on doing sort of an assessment of the organizational structure of economic development in the state of Utah and looking at other states, the ways that they have managed economic development. And, some states are very highly participatory, and there's a direct funding stream that goes from the state to regions specifically for economic development. There's a whole spectrum, right? Utah falls on sort of the lower coordination end of that spectrum, which I don't think should be a surprise given kind of our political climate and philosophy here in Utah that we don't like a lot of big government. That said, along there's a lot of opportunities and strategies that we might want to consider that, we can still maintain our philosophy in terms of how government works with local communities. But there are some opportunities for increased coordination, communication, collaboration, both across regions and then also from regions to state. And so we'll present some ideas on that to you all today. I want to just highlight that our goal with this effort is not to be prescriptive. This isn't intended to be a top-down, here's the state telling each region what you should and shouldn't do. That's not our approach at all. It's also not entirely bottom-up with all the regions telling the state, well, here's what we want to do. The idea is to bring us all together. I see our role at the state as really being that of a facilitator, bringing partners together and creating a forum for communication, collaboration, sharing information and data, and identifying opportunities where we can partner with one another, leverage our resources, and accomplish more. So really the goal is to kind of elevate the state as a whole. I will also note that the Wasatch Front area and MAG is doing pretty darn well. in terms of economic development. I mean, this is the economic engine of the state, and that's probably not going to change. That said, the success that Utah is feeling is not universal across the state. There are some regions in the state that are struggling a little bit more, and I think there's a great mentorship opportunity for the Wasatch Front, and I think there's an opportunity for us to take some of the great successes and lessons learned here and share those with other parts of the state. If the state's doing better as a whole, we all do better. And so that's really our hope here, is to bring partners together. Any questions on where we've been or what's coming next?
I just want to make a comment. And I think one of the things that we've talked about going back to that is that our 5-year SEDS typically have been output oriented. How many meetings do you attend, and how many CRAs have we developed? And so as we move into understanding what the outcome is regionally and statewide, we want to make sure that we're bringing those more into an outcomes oriented. So how can we move that needle? How can we move that needle in social determinants of health? And, how can we move those needles? And so that's what our SEDS is going to look at. So helping us with more of the outcomes and not necessarily just the output. So.
Yeah, that's great. I really hope that, when the state produces its product of this planning effort, you'll all be able to see, oh, I see exactly where that idea came from. I see, our input reflected here. I know where that's going, and some buy-in. Granted, it's the state's plan. You may not agree with everything in it, but it's a recommendation. Again, it's not directive. It's more of a strategic plan. And then we hope that within your regional SEDS, you'll say, oh, those were great ideas. Let's try and incorporate that here, so that there's kind of some seamless connection between them all. So. Anyways, okay, with that, I'm going to pass it over to our friends at Camoin. I believe Alex is going to start us off.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, I see a lot of familiar faces here in person and online, so I appreciate the consistency and ongoing support and really honest feedback for this effort. Like Laura mentioned, we're traveling around the state this week and having some digital meetings in the coming weeks. And, the success of the recommendations and some of the concepts that we're going to talk about today is really dependent on the support and feedback that we receive from the AOGs. And so we do really want this to be an open and frank conversation. So I'll try and watch online as well, but maybe Rosie, if you see some hands, and just stop me anytime so we can get feedback online as well. I do just we'll zoom out a little bit and talk, again, Laura sort of set the stage, but when we talk about the outcome at the end of this, just sort of ground us in what, we set out to do, and really talk about the how in terms of moving forward with, like Laura said, sort of bridging that regional state. What does that mechanism look like to make that connection in economic development based on the significant growth that's not only happened in this region but across the state, right? What do we have to start thinking about maybe a little bit differently in terms of economic development and really keeping up in the profession and in that realm? All right, so just again, big picture, sort of zooming out what we set out to do with the SED. So I'm sure everyone's familiar, but the comprehensive economic development strategies, all of the AOG regions are on the same timeline now. So all moving towards this September 2023 deadline, which really provides an opportunity to coordinate with this effort and really look at leveraging and sort of elevating the voices of each of the regions specific to their needs. So, I imagine housing is going across jurisdictions, but whether it's specific industries or, workforce needs, really looking again at how the needs in each of the counties or regions might tie in to this statewide effort. Ultimately leveraging whether that's existing resources, federal, state, philanthropic funds. And I do think it's important to point out that the approach that the state's taking right now and this coordination is really a novel approach, this unified economic development across the state. Combined Associates works all over the country. We've worked in 46 states and have not seen this level of collaboration, communication, honestly, even willingness to sort of come to the table. So I do think this is an opportunity and it has already been successful in sort of demonstrating the approach and the potential for unified economic development. So ultimately, right, those are the sort of big picture goals. At the end of the day, these are just some of the very broad outcomes that I think we can all agree that we're working towards, whether that's bettering the state's business climate, improving general quality of life, the amenities, the aspects of outdoor recreation or industry that we all love in Utah, ultimately optimizing economic and community development. That's going to mean different things for different regions, different counties, whatever that means specific to the region and the AOG. All right, like Laura mentioned, we're not going to go through too much data today, but I did just sort of want to point out before we get into sort of the recommendations and some of our concepts, point out some of the major findings from the business survey. This is all information that the AOG has received, but I did just pick out some specifics to the region that I thought it might be interesting to talk about. So on the left-hand side there, you've got some of the statewide results, and then on the right-hand side are some of those specific to the Wasatch Front Regional Council region. So again, not I think some of the things we received were certainly perhaps expected, but to have that data and actual real-time information, I think is really valuable. So just over half of the respondents anticipated hiring more full-time employees this year, so 2023. Another half, about 47%, said they were planning on expanding their facilities in the next 2 to 3 years. So, I call that short-term growth. We're seeing growth there. About 60% indicated that their businesses were in need of technical assistance. So that ranged in everything from marketing, financial assistance, succession planning, gathering and writing grants. So sort of a whole range across the spectrum there. And we've got the breakdown on that. And then ultimately, about 2/3 of respondents said that they felt either good or very good about the business environment across the state. So that broke down a little differently across the regions, but overall, say 2/3 felt pretty positive about the business environment. Then on the right-hand side, you can see some of the specifics to the region. So about 28% of all respondents were from one of the counties in the WFRC region. So 35 businesses noted that they were planning facility expansions in the next 2 to 3 years, and that was the highest across all regions. Southeastern Utah followed pretty closely behind Wasatch Front with 31 facilities that were slated to be expanded. I don't think this is necessarily a surprise, but most respondents in this region mentioned the increasing cost of labor was one of their most pressing challenges. We asked about a huge range of challenges, but labor, cost of labor and workforce certainly rose to the top in, whichever way we asked it. Let's see. I think, workforce really just sort of jumped out again across the state, but in WFRC, 6 County and MAG in particular, recruiting the best possible workforce again rose to the top as the most challenging for businesses, really whichever way we asked it.
Quick question.
Yeah.
How many businesses were in the state survey and what was the industry mix like?
Sure. So there were, I believe, just over 300 responses. We asked businesses if they fell into one of the state's targeted industries. So there's 5 of those. So that ranged anything from life sciences, aerospace. I am forgetting the exact breakdown there, but so we had a handful in the targeted industries, but there were a fair amount of sort of like retail services businesses as well. So, and again, the size of employers ranged from 1 to 9 to over 500. So we've got the exact breakdown of what those responses look like, but there's quite a spectrum.
Alex, if I could just jump in, we can resend that business survey data back out to you all. If you're interested, it's probably, it's been a little while. Also, we will share these slides with you after the meeting as well. So, just so you know.
Alex, you ran over the technical assistance piece pretty fast.
Yes.
What were those major categories again? Financial, marketing?
Yep.
I got those two.
Financial.
Abby Hunsaker's on the phone from Go Utah. I should note Go Utah has been a key partner in this whole effort as the economic development experts. Abby, are you on the phone still? And can you rattle off the targeted industries for the state? We can get that to you afterwards if not.
Sorry, what, Laura, I'm here. It just took me a second to unmute. What was the question?
No worries. Do you know offhand the list of targeted industries for the state?
Yeah. So we've got advanced manufacturing, life sciences, IT, and like tech, IT and tech. And then we've got, let's see, how many did I just list there? 3. And then we have
aerospace.
Yeah.
Let's see. Advanced manufacturing, life sciences, aerospace and defense. And I'm missing one. It's just not coming.
Financial services.
Yeah,
Where was it?
financial services.
That's it. Yeah.
And Marcia, you were looking for the technical assistance categories. Yeah. So marketing, financial assistance, succession planning, grants, finding and writing grants. Those were the sort of major categories there.
Any engineering comments on technical assistance, technical STEM type assistance?
In terms of workforce or?
Workforce development. I mean, Weber State University workforce development, just technical assistance, engineering, anything like that come out in the survey.
Along like feasibility studies or sort of need for.
Well, maybe
engineers.
I haven't worded my question right. So what was it? 58% of respondents indicated their business needed technical assistance. My question is, from a university perspective, was any engineering? I've heard accounting.
Yeah, I think the accounting would sort of fall into the financial planning side of things. So that was certainly one of them. Yep.
Okay, I want to help me out on that.
I think this is higher level than what you're talking about.
Okay.
And then we'll get probably more in the workforce and what is
Okay.
needed. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, let us know. Yeah, we can circle back to
And
that.
then, yeah, if we can send that survey out and the detail, I can do that.
Yeah, we'll get those responses out. All right, so just a snapshot to sort of, again, ground us in where the private sector is, what businesses are feeling in real time. It's been quite a couple of years, so really just to check in. And I know there's several other efforts across the state and certainly across the region to get this real-time information. So having these different pieces to pull together is really helpful. Just to see again, the state of the business environment.
There's a couple of messages from Shailene Gee. If she would like to unmute herself.
Sure.
Oh, they've been addressed. I was just saying that business survey and kind of the breakdown would be helpful, and you confirmed you would redistribute that even as I was typing. Thank you.
All right.
Sorry, one more from Shannon. Shannon, do you want to ask the question?
Yeah, sure. I just saw that there was a comparison between the Wasatch Front having 35 businesses respond saying they were expanding, and in southeastern Utah, there was a response saying 31% of businesses were going to expand. But there's got to be tens or hundreds of thousands of businesses in the Wasatch Front and maybe hundreds in southeastern Utah. So I'm wondering and we might dig into this when you send out that data, but it doesn't seem like there was a proportionate response in those two comparisons.
So, yeah, Wasatch Front did have the highest proportion of responses. And then Southeast had the second, I believe. And so that 35 and 31, those were the two highest number of responses for that question for the facility expansion.
Are those percentages? Maybe that's my confusion.
Nope, those are raw numbers, 35 and 31.
And Shannon, this is Laura. This, we sent this out. It was sort of a self-selected survey response, right? We tried to get as many people to respond as possible from across the state, and we just received whatever responses we happened to get. So it may not be, I would not take any of this as a statistically valid survey. It's just a data point and interesting information.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So on the data side of things and talking about the business survey and some of the other data that we discussed at the last meeting, we talked a lot at the regional level and sort of bundling up the data and looking at things from a higher level, but we heard very specifically that the needs and opportunities across the counties are quite different. Certainly there's overlap in ways to work regionally, and I think that's still really our focus to see how that might work, but that the county specific needs are incredibly important and really require different types of attention. So I believe Marcia had made the call out just to the different counties to look at what those specific needs were. So you can see some of the overlap and differences here, but whether that's, site readiness for places that are really, growing from within, working on business retention and expansion, again, building that trust with the existing business community. Maybe it's outdoor recreation and thinking about tourism and what that might mean to growing economic development. Certainly housing, working with land use codes, how that interplay affects everything from workforce attraction and retention. Let's see, what are some other ones? Water systems, infrastructure has been huge across the state. So you can sort of see some different levels here, different layers of how we think about economic development. And I think that's a great tie-in to the Unified Economic Opportunity Council and sort of the holistic approach that the state's been taking. And again, sort of zooming out and saying, okay, economic development, yes, has these core elements, but in order for those core elements to thrive, what else needs to be included in this effort? Again, whether it's housing or workforce or childcare infrastructure, what does that look like, and how do we take that holistic approach?
And so this was and you get this from some of the information that the counties provided you.
Yep.
There was a lot of things on there. You just pick three, or
I just to sort of take a snapshot, but yes, there's certainly, and there were, full-blown programs and initiatives and projects. This was just sort of the snapshot of some of either the overlapping ones or the ones that were sort of the highest priority, it looked like. Yep. All right, I think that's a good place to talk about.
Okay, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. It's great that we have such a fantastic turnout today on such a critical issue here. My name is Dan Gunderson, as a refresher, from Camoin, and I'm going to walk you through, okay, so what does all this mean? Where do we go from here? We, as consultants, had an interesting challenge that we took on with this assignment. It was not to produce an economic strategy for the state overall. in that it's not doing what EDC Utah does in terms of looking at the targeted industries, looking at the direction, looking at the really what's happening within those industries and what we need to focus on, nor was it looking at the entirety of the economic development spectrum, what should be done for entrepreneurship and such. Rather, it was to look at the future and what is needed to improve success of the SEDS, success of the state in terms of the overall direction that it's headed. Thus, it's called a coordinated action plan, not so much a strategy, but a plan. How do we get all the pieces so that they're fitting together and everybody's moving along, and different regions, different players are seeing that their priorities are advancing. That's really what it was all about. So one of the first things that we determined with the state was that there were some things we could do to help put things in perspective that could help you as you develop your sets. And you've just heard some of that. First, what is the business input? Not a statistically valid survey, but a sampling around the state. And all of that data will be provided obviously to the council, which will be helpful. Consider it a launching pad for being able to probe, hey, the state survey said this. Let's dig a little deeper. Let's find out if this is in fact a real issue. What are our businesses saying? So it was a broad survey that I think is going to be very helpful. The second was to look at where Utah stands comparatively, nationally. You know, rankings are elusive. Rankings, when you really understand them, are a funny thing. Sometimes it's there's bias given who is conducting the rankings, you know, maybe which magazine or what philosophical issue they may have, and the rankings show that out, whether it's, you know, a conservative think tank or the Brookings, or, you know, you really have to understand what it means. So what we decided instead was to evaluate all 50 states on 6 measures of economic prosperity. Let's return to the fundamentals always and look at how Utah stands, and then to drill that down into the regions, and then where possible, and it's not always possible, where the counties stand. So that comparative information will also be provided to you in advance, so that when you're developing your SEDS, it can be indicators of areas in which you might want to explore a little bit more. Where do we stand on that innovation ranking? We don't like to use the word ranking, but for this purpose, I'll say that. Where did Camoin find us positioning on that? Where do they find us positioned on infrastructure, and so forth and so on? So that was number 3. Number 4, what are we hearing from around the state? From all corners of the state. Again, take it as a barometer, so that when you're developing your SEDS, look at what we've heard and see if it needs some grounding, some validation, or if it's an episodic, you know, maybe a lone voice out there. But we're going to show some patterns in the final report, which incidentally, all of this will be available by within 30 to 60 days. So well in advance of the heat of the SEDS, but in time, purposely timed, so it can be of most use. And then finally, what is coming up as priorities around the state. Now, we felt that was what was most needed at this juncture to help with the SEDS process, and then to look at where the state was and how does it align the different strategies that are already out there, the strategies that are being considered for the future, particularly as Go Utah and EDC Utah have new leaders and new direction. How does that align with where the governor is going, the budget, et cetera? So this brings us to unified economic opportunity. That was the real challenge here, was how do we unify what is going on within the economic development world that can result in the greatest economic opportunity? So let's refresh that. Let's look at what that's all about. The Economic Opportunity Commission at the state level is much broader, as you all know, than economic development. And so too, when you look at what is economic opportunity, here's a visual we developed that might help put this in some perspective. Very elementary perspective, but powerful, really, if you try to look at it in this way. How do you bring all the different aspects together? First, core economic development. Those of you who have been in the economic development profession for so long know that the profession has gone a long ways from just jobs and investment, just deals upon deals. It's really become much more inclusive, much more integrated of a number of issues with this, the business attraction, the retention, the entrepreneurship, industry growth, exports, and so on, innovation, all of these things that have comprised economic development in communities where they are looking to unify those efforts with what else is going on in their communities, the other needs. The first branching out is to integrate that with community development. And we see this, the needs of housing and placemaking, smart land use as growth takes off. How is that all integrated? The next way to look at this in terms of integration or unification, if you will, human development. How does our educational systems, how do they fit into those goals of core economic development, health, tourism, et cetera? But the real challenge here for economic development, as we all know, is equitable development. Is the development that's occurring, is it benefiting those who may need it the most? Is it reaching all communities? Is it equitable? And the blue circle represents the places that really have it together. And as Alex said, there is no state in the nation that has got this down. None. Utah is one of probably 3 that is closest to moving toward integrating all of these needs from an economic perspective. And just as the governor's office of economic opportunity, they changed their name from development to opportunity. That's a movement in thinking through this unified approach. I'm going to pause there before I then talk about, okay, how do we achieve that? How do we make sure that Utah becomes the national model for unified economic opportunity? There's a lot there to unpack. But before I move too much further, I just want to make sure if anyone had a comment on that or a thought, I'd love to hear it.
Comments?
If not,
I'll make a real quick comment. One of the things, and I don't know if you're going to be presenting this more and who you're presenting this to, but under infrastructure, I'd be really remiss if I didn't add transit or transportation in there.
Of course.
I think Jory would kill me if I didn't. So,
of course.
Anyways, there.
Yeah.
If you could do that, I don't know who you're presenting this to. But
Absolutely.
I mean, infrastructure is a lot of things, but
it is
from our
infrastructure.
group, it's
and we just picked out a few. Just
yeah,
to give
I know
you
you did. I just was.
yeah.
It would be key though.
All right, not a problem. Not a problem. All right, so the information that we've produced so far is going to help with the SEDS. The question now and the challenge to us was, how do you integrate 7 different SEDS with what the state's priorities are and with what the Economic Opportunity Commission is doing and what their priorities are? Do they sync? And cutting to the chase, hope I don't give away the plot, but they don't sync. You have 7 different sets. Yes, they check the box for the EDA in terms of what's included in those sets so that they get approved as sets. But to Marcia's point, most of the sets focused on inputs and outputs. And they do provide some goals, but they fall far short of aspirational goals and looking at the gap between where a community stands and where it needs to go and how it mitigates the weaknesses, how it bridges that divide from here's where we are, here's where we need to be, here's how we're going to get there. And it's great that the front is looking at producing a SEDS that is more focused in that direction. So if all SEDS were to do the
You tell my
same,
boss that.
yeah, I'll be glad to. We're recording this. Just yeah. So the state's growing. We know this. And so too are its needs and its opportunities, but the structures have remained the same. And we all know that you need to change. And even the economic development infrastructure needs to change if it's going to keep up with what's going on. You know, if any of you visit Washington, D.C., and you go to the Jefferson Monument, and you look at Thomas Jefferson standing there, over his shoulder, there is engraved in the wall, is a quote of his that we cannot be expected to wear the same coat as an adult as we had as a child. We grow. We have to adapt. We need to be flexible. So how do we do this when we have 7 regions, 29 counties, 253 municipalities, all have economic development needs, all can probably, if pressed, state what their priorities are? How do you sift through all this and think of it from the state's perspective? How do they do this? How do they respond? And also in a unified approach, how do economic development priorities, core economic development priorities, remain front and center, right? So that was the second part of our challenge in putting together a coordinated action plan. Alex, you want to move this on? So here are some of the broad, kind of bring it all up to the top. What are we trying to solve? What are the problems or the hurdles that need to be cleared? The first thing, when we look at statewide, both at the state level and at the regional level, is that the private sector can be more engaged in the problem solving and in the priority setting. This is more relevant in some areas than it is in others, but as a general rule, economic development here is very, very much reliant upon, driven by, managed by the public sector. And yet the public sector isn't paying the taxes that produce the revenue. The public sector isn't creating the jobs that are providing that revenue, that is driving the economy. The public sector isn't investing in the new facilities that are driving this economic growth. The private sector needs to be more engaged, more at the table, we think. And so we have some thoughts about that as we move forward. I think that's a key thing when we look at commissions, when we look at task forces, when we look at the composition of our economic development committees. How engaged is the business community in these discussions? Next, keeping up with advancements in economic development. The field of economic development has changed radically. I talked about that in broad strokes over the last 10 years, but where it's going in the future, are our economic developers really plugged into that and keeping up with that? And who's supporting? Who is supporting? Who has their back throughout the state? Think about it. We'll talk about that in the future. A little bit about equitable opportunities for economic development. Growth may be fantastic, but as conversations over the last few years have shown, some of it might be, we may have a bias or a blindness as to whom that development is benefiting, and are we leaving others at the wayside? How do we ensure that there's more equitable consideration given here so that everyone can prosper? Of course, reconciling urban and rural needs, nothing new here, but the point here is it's very difficult it hasn't been achieved ideally, if it's been achieved at all, reconciling, trying to figure out how other areas can benefit from the fast growth that Utah is experiencing. It's uneven. It's uneven. So as consultants, we were asked, is there anything we can do first, ideally, that might not involve money, but anything we can do to help disperse that growth? Disparity of tools, technologies, talent, and resources. The front has the advantage, no question about it. No question about it. A lot more sophisticated tools, technology, some world-class talent. All of this is helping the front keep its lead, but it's also putting it further ahead of the other regions that are falling behind. And with disruptive growths in all of this, particularly in technologies, that chasm is growing even bigger, even wider. And so how do we try to address this? We're looking at unified growth for the state. Next. So what's missing? It's the connections. It's connections, connecting all of these great things that are happening around the state together between the state strategies, the regional strategies. And what's missing is that forum and some processes for this continuous communication, coordination, collaboration, so that all regions are learning from one another and working together. And that the conversation remains focused, centered on economic development and doesn't get lost in the cacophony of all the needs and all the priorities of the state. We have some things that we'd like to present for your consideration today. We're putting some final touches on some of these areas that will be provided as part of the final report to help harmonize these things. So we want just a few ideas, just one or two in each of these areas to bring forward today. We want to talk about SEDS, the SEDS, and some thoughts about how each SEDS might consider including a couple elements, just a couple elements that would really help advance those larger goals of unification. We want to talk about regions as state improvements. What might the state be able to do? Looking at local economic partnerships that can be different from what the region wants, the profession as a whole, how the state can better support the regions, and then lastly, what might the state administration, the EDC Utah, Go Utah, the Go Utah Board, Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, what might they consider to improve three things? This is what it's all about: communication, coordination, and collaboration. That's what the plan is all about. So if you're ready to go, I'll jump into a few of these. First, as you're developing your SEDS, we think that one of the greatest advances, it's simple, well, not so simple, it's actually very complex, but it's a simple idea that could go a long way. And that is if every SEDS included a commitment to work with another AOG. Maybe it's a partnership, maybe it's an initiative, a priority, a program, something. If each SEDS was linked in some way as one of the action items to another, we think that would be fantastic. Second, how do the SEDS link up with what the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission is thinking about and considering? In fact, a work group of the commission has floated the idea that SEDS ought to include linkages. What are the economic linkages of housing, of public health, and of water conservation? Those are three areas that they would like to see in each of the SEDS. Let's make sure that they're aligned. I think that can be done. And then thirdly, all of all the SEDS, and you know this, all the SEDS are required to include an analytic profile of the region, demographic, economic. And so each one of the SEDS, some are more robust than others in terms of their data analysis, but it's all over the place. So we picked 16 elements that if every SEDS were to incorporate these data elements, then we, working with the state, can develop dashboards for the regions and for the state. And so that each region would have a dashboard, they would see how it compares with the state on these measures, and we can use it as a management tool moving forward. Are we making progress? Are the SEDS, are the goals in the SEDS, are they moving forward over the next 5 years? The state can look at that dashboard and say, maybe it's not. Here's where we may need to provide more help to this region or to that region. And so these different data elements cross economic competitiveness, infrastructure, community resources. They're not just hard measures. Some of them are easy and no-brainers, total population, total jobs. Others are a little bit more focused. So what we will be doing is providing the data or the sources and a manual, if you will, on how to easily collect this information so it doesn't become a burden, doesn't become onerous or a new full-time job or even a part-time job, but rather just in a matter of hours, how can all this data be collected? Okay, do we have questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious, since I know earlier talking about kind of the equity component. And so looking at some of these Common Core data elements, I'm wondering if the idea is to just look at population as a whole, for example, for the employed workforce category or the population growth category, or to also break that down into different components of the population and see, how those different components are changing.
Yeah. And that's what we want to talk to you about. What do you think we're going to give you the general areas. There are a lot of ways to look at that, to slice and dice it. Some of those measures, the data is readily available through public sources. Some of it is just on a statewide level. Some of it is on a regional level. When you start getting down into considerations of equity, is it per capita? Is it a percent? What is, what are we measuring here? But we're open to, if you have an idea for us that you think would be most useful, let us know. Because we're developing a beta of this dashboard right now. If equity is if you think, we don't care about, total jobs overall. What we really want to know is XYZ. Let's include that in the dashboard if we can. Okay.
I have a quick comment there, if there's time for it.
Yep.
Especially on the infrastructure, but also some of the other unified economic opportunity. One of the things we're running into on several fronts is the issue of ownership, specifically real estate ownership, on housing, on business, especially small business, but other factors. Information about who owns versus who rents, who leases, where's the property ownership. This has dramatic cascading effects, as you can imagine, and it's really difficult to kind of parse that out currently with partners, and it's coming up in a lot of conversations that we have.
Okay, well, it's good. I think when I say, one thing to keep in mind is that I think each one of the regions is going to want to collect its own information that is most relevant to that region. So if these 16, these are just some of the core that we know we can collect amongst all the regions. But as you're developing your SEDS, think about those kinds of measures, those kinds of issues. What are you hearing, and what kind of data do you need to be able to use the SEDS as a management tool. When Marcia talks about outcomes, you're only going to achieve outcomes if you can manage the outputs, if you can know what it all means, what the data means, and if you can take action, follow up with your strategies to produce the outcomes. And that's what we're trying to do. So we're just trying to find 16 measures that every region can adopt. I don't want to include measures that are only relevant to the front in those 16 for the dashboard to start. Now, the dashboard can evolve over time. Does that help answer that? So I think that's probably an issue. What you're bringing up in terms of ownership and real estate, I think that's something for your SEDS committee to wrestle with.
A quick question. As you pointed out, the first idea there seems to me pretty powerful and easy to say and complicated to do.
Yes.
Are there examples of that you know of other other states of regions doing that really well, working with one another?
No, you want to mention the one?
I can give one local example, actually. So the Southeast Utah Association of Local Governments has partnered with the Uinta Basin on the development of a proposed freight rail corridor that would connect their regions. Obviously, their industry is very extractive based, it's natural resources, but there's not a great transportation connection there to get goods and services in and out. And so they partner together on across 7 counties to make a project like that happen. That's a local example. I'm sure there's many others, and I think we could probably come up with some case studies to recommend.
I can just add one more from the state of Virginia. We're doing 2 regional SEDS there. They've probably got 5 to 6 counties in each of their regions, sort of similar planning district commissions. And so they're each doing independent SEDS, and then they're coming together for what they're calling super regional strategies. So having distinct sort of priorities for their own regions, but understanding that they've got economies of scale in certain industries, and just opportunities to sort of leverage their voice as a whole. It's a quite rural area and sort of otherwise, isn't necessarily the dominant voice in the state of Virginia. So just looking at ways to elevate the rural voice with their super regional strategies.
And I should note that initiative in Virginia is funded by ARPA funds and is one of the things that EDA is looking at. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the future we're seeing EDA say some of the very same things we're saying now. Let's have this be something that we encourage regions to do. So maybe you get ahead of the game by thinking in this way.
Marcia, how much have we worked with MAG in the past?
We are actually working together for other things like our transportation and land connection, where we've done actually just recently our consultant pool we did with them. So we're starting to do a lot more with MAG. And I know they're going out for their 5-year SEDS plan as well. So we're hoping that we can share a lot more. But and we work closely with Bear River too. So but just not a whole lot of projects that have come out. So
I just say, as we play with the SEDS, the line that divides us is kind of invisible and irrelevant now. So the more that we can kind of leverage this opportunity to talk about how the two come together.
Beautiful. I'm going to move along because I want to make sure we get everything in. And then at the end, if there's still questions, we can handle those questions later. This is more dashboard stuff. You can, on this dashboard for all those measures, we'll be able to drill down into the counties. And again, this is toward using SEDS outcomes as a management tool. Let's move on to this. This is going to address the question of the fact that there are 7 SEDS in the state of Utah. And how do you manage what's going on? How do you make sure that all SEDS are moving forward? This is from a state perspective, but it's also from a regional perspective. How do we keep front and center the priorities, the needs, the strategies of these SEDS when there's so much else going on throughout the state? Again, this is unification. This is, and by that I mean just on coordination, communication, collaboration, what can be done with no cost, no staff, no additional staff. One of the things that we think is that if the regions were to come together around economic development, this could really be, this could fill a void. There is a void right now. It's each region for itself, for all intents and purposes. There's no table for the regions to come together to consider what's going on and to make sure that their needs are being advanced at a statewide level. So we think that some of the areas for improvement, some of this drills down into the regions, some of this goes up to all 7 regions, but to develop annual economic priorities for the region, not just 5-year, but annual, being able to adjust it, being able to have the SEDS be much more flexible. As we know, the last SEDS was thrown out the window almost with COVID. It's something that wasn't considered with supply chain interruptions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Developing annual economic opportunities, coordinating, being able to coordinate consolidated funding opportunities that the state might develop. There's some demonstration projects that Laura is involved with now with one of the AOGs where different state funding sources are being looked at and consolidated to meet regional needs. I think you're going to see much more of that in the future. Well, where does that get discussed amongst all of the regions? How is the region providing its input other than 7 to 1, 7 all at the same time? Is it being discussed around one table? Developing interregional partnerships within the regions, and then monitoring it, the performance moving forward. So what is being proposed here for your consideration is the establishment of a regional economic development advisory board within each region. Now, each region is structured differently when it comes to economic input, and it may already exist within some regions. It doesn't in all, where you have an advisory board that's helping to provide input on the direction of the county, of the region in terms of where it's headed, but that has private sector voice at the table. And so what we're talking about, is there a possibility of establishing a committee that might be a subset, might be a variation, might be a tweaking, perhaps of the SEDS implementation committee, or perhaps of this larger group of 50 people that are on the phone today with a few additions that can provide a strong private sector voice into what we are all trying to achieve, but be small enough to be flexible. Let's go to the next slide and you'll see kind of how this visually gets represented. So if each one of the regions had its own economic advisory board that had civic representation, business leaders, local economic developers, and AOGs representing the public sector, if they had this board and then the chairperson coming probably from an institution, the institutional or the private sector, the chairs then comprise an regional economic collaborative. So all 7 regions are now filling a void that exists within the state of Utah right now to be around the same table and to help make sure that their said strategies, priorities, and other economic interests are being advanced. And it helps streamline really the communication, the coordination, and the collaboration between state and region. How does this fit together then with where the state is at? Next slide. Well, we have the unified economic opportunity. And then, please keep in mind, this is not a This is not an organizational chart. This isn't lines of authority top down. This is more of a functional kind of a representation here. So please don't look at it top down, bottom up. It's just, okay, let's see how does it fit? What is the state doing? Well, you have the Go Utah board, you have Go Utah, you have this nonprofit EDC Utah. How are they interfacing with the regions? Again, there's no set structure really. And so what we're suggesting is with 7 individuals that are representing 7 different regions, some of this can be streamlined and perhaps made a little bit more efficient and effective. That's the overall thinking, again, with no cost. We've got some comments. Yes.
I just have a question on it is, aren't the AOGs, and maybe it's just a misunderstanding of mine, but aren't the AOGs working together now?
You mean with economic development? or-
Yes.
Yeah, so all the AOGs get together on a quarterly basis. All the economic development AOG representatives get together on a quarterly basis to talk about this.
So then why is this needed as part of the economic plan if it's already being done?
The AOGs have many issues that they advance, economic development being one of them. The AOGs predominantly are representing the governmental public sector perspective. What we're suggesting is that the advisory board include and be more engaging of a private sector voice. And so that this is a blending more, but it's a more of a focus on economic development. With more, yeah.
Are you proposing that these advisory board?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So are you proposing that the advisory board then replace the current quarterly meetings, or that this would be an additive board?
I can respond to that. So the composition of this board is actually dictated by the federal government. There is a specific list of membership that's required there. This new body would be something additive, is the proposal. It could be a subset of this group. Each different region has a different starting point. We've got great private sector representation here. That is not the case in all of the regions. Some are exclusively, it's the mayor who happens to own another business, right? And so they count him as the business representative. And so in each region, the structure could look a little bit different. It could just be a subset of this group. So that there's good coordination. But the idea is that it's a really small, nimble group with greater private sector participation than we see in a lot of the other regions in the state, and those partners coming together to form this regional collaborative, talking with one another at that level. If that helps.
And I think you would say that our board is probably, we call everyone on our board a board member. And so, yes, by law, we have to have a certain public entities that participate. But I think if you would, most of everybody else is in a private sector. So, and including education, I think that was the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think to those 2 points, this is an EDD. Like the difference between an EDD and an AOG is because it's supposed to be focused on economic development. Sounds like the recommendation is just to slim up the board because sometimes these are large and unwieldy. That being said, switching it to such a heavy weight, and I say this as a bureaucrat, so maybe it's complete self-interest, but if you put such a heavy weight to the private sector, there's a difference between business and economic development. As someone who's been on both sides, that's a weird situation where we'd have to spend a lot of time teaching our business people who are great at what they do, how economic development is different. And I think you lose the mandate because how are they going to dictate to a county or a city, like these should be your priorities in order for it to align? It seems like the stakeholder composition there is a little funky. And kind of there's a reason the EDDs have the stakeholders that we do. Just a thought.
We've heard that feedback in MAG as well. I think this is a proposal. The reason we're here collecting input is to solicit your feedback, and perhaps the composition and the ratios could be adjusted. And so it's, 60-40 or, something like that. But great point. We don't want to say that our governmental economic development professionals don't know what they're doing. That's not the point of this at all. It's more to elevate the conversations across the state among all who are involved in economic development.
Yeah. And
Please.
May I mention another thing? Okay, so each one of our county or area CEO boards have business owners on them. So you're saying that we need to, I'm not seeing the whole picture when we've got this group here. We've got the state that's trying to put more of us to try to coordinate things, which I think is a great idea. But each area has these businesses that are trying to direct all of us. Why aren't we using, is that your proposal basically to try to get more of the private sector businesses into helping develop a plan? I'm not following this. It seems to me like this is just another government program or the government opportunity where in reality we should be working together with all the AOGs, just like we found out the other morning with the legislature, is that there's an AOG down in central Utah that's working on an item that should be a statewide problem or a statewide issue, which I think it is, according to Marcia may have more insight on it, but that's what I'm seeing is they need to be working together. Is that this plan that you're trying to explain to us?
yeah. Yes, the overarching objective here is to ensure that all 7 regions are learning from one another and that their interests have a forum that is coordinating that so they have a stronger voice. And to be more streamlined in working with the state to advance their interests. Now, we've already acknowledged, and we know this, the Wasatch Front has many of, if not all, of the tools, resources, processes, maybe not funds, but processes needed to succeed and to compete very successfully. 5 or 6 of the others lack that and could benefit greatly from what is going on here. So to establish an economic advisory board could be very easy. It's probably just a subset of what we already have here. For these others, it's a very heavy lift. And in some of these places that we've been to, there's zero private sector engagement in the conversations that we have. They're just not there. And some of the counties are falling behind because they don't know how to address the business climate issues that only the businesses can help inform on. Yeah, Marcia.
Yeah, I was just going to say too that, 2 areas that probably, and I don't know where it fits in here, but tourism, outdoor, recreation, I don't know where that fits in, and then higher ed, those kind of things.
I'd include tourism in probably 2, even 3, even 4. Actually, all 4 boxes underneath the advisory board. Tourism is a strong part of economic development. It is economic development, but it's also representing civic and institutional interests. The heritage, the nonprofit communities, et cetera. So I think tourism's part of that. They should be on the board. Yeah.
And higher education, I think, falls into that civic institution.
Institutions, definitely.
was just thinking through when people were applying for EDA grants, what requests I get. And so I just want to make sure that how we're doing.
Yeah. All right, let's move on because we have limited time and I value your input here because we need to move on. Economic development partnerships. This is what more can be done just on some of that core economic development, business retention and expansion. Again, keep in mind, we're talking about needs across the entire state. We're not saying that a problem exists within the front, okay? So we got to keep that in mind. But business BRE, it is a core element of any good economic development strategy. And BRE efforts around the country have become incredibly sophisticated, well organized. The best practices are out there. Are your economic developers meeting with the businesses? What is the input from that? How are they responding to it? We across the country, when we do strategies and we survey, here's one of the most stunning findings that we see. Is that when a business is visited by a local economic developer or even a public official or even a federal representative, a US senator, but usually it's the local economic developer. When they are visited, when they are asked, how are they doing? What do they need to get to scale up, to meet the next growth? What are the challenges? What are their gripes? When that interaction, face-to-face interaction occurs, and we then survey the business community and say, what do you think about the business climate? The percentage doubles in terms of the favorability of the business climate with those that have been visited through business retention and expansion programs, having a better belief that the business climate is strong, that the state overall is moving in the right direction. BRE is tough to do. I spent 25 years as an economic development professional. I know this. Oh my gosh, it takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. It's a headache. You can structure it such that you're not meeting with all businesses, of course. You're meeting with a representative sampling and you're surveying, et cetera. The state had a BEAR program. It still does. That is part of a rural grant that communities can direct their monies, a grant to be used so that they can establish this kind of a program. The point here is that we would encourage all regions, and again, we're not pointing out a problem in the front, but all regions to have their SEDS include acknowledgement of some kind of business outreach, retention, and expansion. And then to strengthen the AOG's economic development functions, to continue to support that. Laura and her team have been, this is personal opinion, but I've heard it from all regions, really appreciative of the fact that the state now provides some funding to the AOGs to support the economic development functions. That needs to continue. And then there are regions throughout the state that lack an economic development person at all. And some AOGs provide those services to those counties. So this is just a plug to keep that going.
I don't know who this presentation is going to go to, but is there a different wording that we could use instead of lacking economic development issues?
Officials,
I'm sorry.
missing or without.
Maybe without, yeah, our region obviously is not lacking economic development officials. In fact, we have quite a few.
It's kind of
I
funny,
hear from.
Marcia.
So maybe just different words.
It's kind of funny when we were in an earlier version of this, in an earlier meeting, we had the word without. And so it was changed. Because it sounded like, oh, you want to continue to coordinate, but you don't want economic development officials in the table. So at any rate, but the point being that there are some that are just don't have that, and AOGs are filling that role. Yeah, some. Okay, next. This is interesting. In our national comparative analyses, there are only, I think it was 6 states in the nation that do not have an economic development association representing the interest of the economic developers. Utah ranks in that, but with a footnote in that there is the alliance that serves to fulfill some of these functions, primarily to help network. And I know it's in a kind of a nascent, kind of still probably trying to get traction to grow and represent a larger community. But those states that have an association, many of them have been in business for 20, 30 years. They are the most, I don't know any other word, but beloved, cherished, embraced, recognized, supported groups for economic developers. Just like the APA, and Laura can talk about this, all professions have their associations. This could go a long way, particularly to provide training, to be host for certification for the economic development community. We don't see in our travels, we don't see as many certified economic developers in Utah as we do elsewhere. We just don't. There's very few CFDs. And there are different organizations that provide it, and probably the lead, of course, is the International Economic Development Council that does this. Now it's expensive, and such an organization could provide scholarships to some, perhaps, to move this along. But the point here is, where are the young professionals, the next generation of economic developers? Where are they learning? Where are they being mentored? And it's often in a statewide association that helps provide that, an independent group. So here we're saying this might be an existing group that can evolve, or it may need to be an entirely new group, but it needs to be the economic developers, not government, that is establishing this for the pure reason of independence and representation of the economic developers.
I just add, I know we have Chris Roybal from the Northern Utah Economic Alliance on the call. And, this could be an expansion of role for an organization like that. But Dan mentioned that I'm a member of the American Planning Association. We have a couple of conferences every year. There's ongoing learning opportunities. There's an official certification program. There's a listserv where we can email our professional peers and ask for a question or advice. And it's been a pretty influential organization in professional development for planners in the state. And it seems like there's a great opportunity here. It could even be a subset of APA.
All right, and then next, and then we'll just wrap it up. I know we're coming short on time, and we want to make sure that we have an open Q&A as well if needed. What are some of the state recommendations? Now we're speaking primarily to Go Utah and EDC Utah. We think that there ought to be consideration given to having an ad hoc, not in place as a standing committee, but just as the implementations for a number of recommendations that will be made in this report, just to help facilitate it, to make sure that there's the accountability, management control and accountability for Go Utah and EDC Utah to follow through on some of these things. Perhaps that can be best fulfilled by an ad hoc task force, the Go Utah board. How are you guys doing on this? How are you moving forward? With a lot of emphasis on those recommendations that will be directed specifically to the state. One of the things that it could be done is to increase the effectiveness of the communications with the AOGs, much more frequency. We're talking transparency here, maybe quarterly reports. Here's what's going on in the state overall, not just in GOPB, but in other entities to support what's happening with the SEDS. Let's have much more of that. Increase the reach of the social media, both internally and to external audiences. We're seeing some fantastic advances of other states where they've utilized social media to push much more information out so that you don't question, well, what's going on today? And then perhaps even a statewide portal for disseminating that information to the AOGs and encouraging that region to region interaction. A house for it. Alex, why don't you take us to where do we go from here, and then we'll open it up.
All right, so we have covered quite a bit of ground. And I know it's going to take a little bit to sort of sink in what all this means in practice and how might it work sort of day to day and all of that. So I think we want to take a breath and think through that, just big picture quickly. Like I mentioned, we are talking to all of the AOGs over this week and next week. So I think this is meeting 4 of 7. So we've got feedback to sort of build on and work on and vet some of these concepts that we'll continue to do throughout the month, and then really look to the rest of this quarter to put everything together and finalize and sort of launch the report, and then look to mid this year and really initiate implementation and look at what that means to move some of the concepts forward that we've talked about, which again will align with the SEDS that WFRC and all that other AOGs are working on. With that, like I said, I know we covered a lot, so I think we just want to, whether it's online or in person, certainly open it up. But I think we're just sort of curious, like a gut check to some of the concepts that we've talked about today. Are we, feeling great, on the fence, or like, oh no, we need to throw this out, just a gut check. Where are we at? Honestly.
Get your hands out, folks. Let's see those thumbs.
Hey, I'll jump in. This is Chris Roybal. I'm the president of the Northern Utah Economic Alliance, which is a joint regional partnership between Davis and Weber County that was put together about 3.5 years ago as a regional economic development partnership. So I think a couple of comments as I've tried to listen today. One, I think there's a lot of benchmarking that could be done with existing groups where things are already in place and running well. For example, you talked a lot about public-private partnerships. EDC Utah has been a public-private partnership for, I think, now about 25 years. They have a terrific public-private board that operates, for that reason, to have interface between the private sector. That's how our regional partnership is set up. We have a public-private board. The private sector input's, very, very important, obviously, as you have mentioned today. So I don't know how that translates to all the different rural regions of the state, but I think that they could probably, learn from EDC Utah's state public-private model, learn maybe perhaps from our regional public-private model. All of what we do, for example, in our region won't translate to every different, rural labor pool area across the state. But I do think there's some benchmarking data that, if I were a rural economic developer, or I were in a place maybe not along the Wasatch Front that's more established, that's what I would do. I'd go collect data from these groups and know how to do it. And then there's also some other national, the times I've been in economic development, we benchmark against other national economic development groups that do it right, do it well, whether it's a regional partnership, a statewide partnership, or even a city or county partnership. So I would encourage the groups to gather some state and national data from other groups who've had success with public-private partnerships, and try to, each region's going to be a little bit different. The labor pool, the natural labor pools are different. I'm not sure they completely align with all of the different AOGs. I haven't studied it from a statewide perspective, but I think there's some good data to learn there. We're certainly willing to offer up our model as an example of what can be done in other regions in the state. I think Davis and Weber did a good job of leading out in that regional area. Utah hasn't traditionally had a lot of strong regional partnerships like you see, say, in the southeastern part of the United States, where they've done some great regional partnerships. So that's where we went first, was to benchmark against some really strong regional partnerships in the southeastern part of the United States. So I think there's a lot of great data both inside the state and outside the state as you kind of formulate and put together things that will be helpful for other different AOGs around the state. I think it was obviously mentioned that the resources along the Wasatch Front are completely different than what they are in rural Utah. So anyway, applaud your efforts. It's a difficult, complex issue across the state. Even along the Wasatch Front, for example, most of the cities that we have just in Davis and Weber County that are heavily populated do not have full-time economic developers. So we have to coordinate and work differently with them. And it's even more, diluted as you get further out into rural communities. But happy to help. Great to see what you're doing. And I think Utah has done well, but obviously we can always do better.
Thanks, Chris.
This is Shalene. I support what Chris just said as well. And I'll just repeat what I quickly put in the chat, which is I also strongly support some structure that helps business understand and align with economic development efforts. To the point made previously, there's a staggering reverse need as well for business to understand what economic development actually is in order to align with it. And so it's not just the reverse. And so anything that supports equal mutual information exchange otherwise is presented, I think is spot on, and the business community needs it to help.
Thanks for that.
I'm going to really make you put your thumbs out. How are we feeling? Like, yes, move forward with reservations. Yeah, I'm not so sure I need more information. And like, no, I don't like where we're headed. I think Blaine's down here. Yeah. Up, sideways, sideways, sideways. You're up. Okay. All right. It's a lot of information. This is a concept, right? And I just want to emphasize that we're not trying to, tell anybody how to do anything. It's an idea to facilitate communication and coordination. I really see the state's role as being a facilitator, and there's not really anybody else out there to bring all of the regions together unless they voluntarily do it themselves. And, so we're trying to just kind of give it a little bit of a nudge. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity, great feedback and comments here to help us kind of think through.
Nice day out there.
It was. That was so nice this morning.
All right. I think we're done.
Be able to see, yeah.
Commissioner Froer, you're not on mute, just so you know. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate the time. I think that you can see where these guys are going, and it will lead into our next.
Hey.
Did you do the 8 o'clock? Commissioner Froer, are you wanting to speak, or we keep putting you on mute? Do you want to speak?
No, good. Sorry, I just was on another call.
Oh, okay. Thanks for juggling. And a couple of things. Make sure I will send out a link to you all for all the presentations, just the business surveys. But I think the other couple of things that I will send out is a link to the Alliance. It will help them strengthen. It's not very expensive. So if you want to join the Alliance, there are private industries that are part of that Alliance. So I'll send that link out as well. But thank you for your presentation, and I think we'll have something going forward for sure. So
Thank you.
Thank you.